Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Douglas Brown, CEO at Halo Consulting. Halo is a certified minority-owned search firm based in Chicago, and we provide a variety of custom, scalable, talent-driven solutions for organizations in growth mode. Halo was founded to provide the process-oriented best practices our team developed at top executive search firms with a cost-conscious scrappiness you'd expect from a boutique or startup. Halo hosts virtual roundtable events like this one for HR and technology leaders on a variety of topics, and we hope you'll be interested in attending our future events. This event is being recorded, and feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A function in the toolbar, and we'll address those questions at the end. We will be sharing a survey to gather your feedback, and we will have a recorded version of this event available on YouTube as well. For now, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So I'd like to introduce Roshan Seja. Roshan is a Navy veteran with over 11 years of experience working on veterans hiring and education initiatives. She is currently an onboarding manager at Zillow Group, where she also served as Zillow's first Veteran Affinity Network president for 2 years. Before Zillow, she worked at Microsoft as their first operations program manager for the Microsoft Software and Systems Academy. Prior to Microsoft, she was a military liaison for Ashford University, supporting all military bases and veteran organizations across the Northwest and Alaska. Next, I would like to introduce Dan Shumate. Dan manages the Hiring Partner Engagement and Communication Program for Microsoft Software and Systems Academy, also known as MSSA, Microsoft's tech training program for transitioning military members and veterans. The MSSA Hiring Partner Program has grown to over 750 companies that engage with MSSA graduates for job opportunities focused on tech. Previously, Dan served as an airborne infantryman in the U.S. Army, followed by nearly 10 years of construction management. In his construction, in the construction industry, Dan grew from managing small teams to managing and allocating resources on $100 million plus freeway projects. Dan received a master's degree in project management with a systems engineering focus and a bachelor's degree in technical management from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. He also holds a PMP certification. Next, I would like to introduce George Berliner. George is a member of the Booz Allen Military and Veteran Affairs team. In this role, he contributes to Booz Allen's effort to be known as the preeminent military employer, the most innovative partner, and a recognized leader and a member of the military community. Prior to his current position, he developed and led the military hiring initiative at Booz Allen and served as the lead recruiter for the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic region. George launched his professional career serving in the U.S. Navy as an avionics technician, was promoted to Chief Petty Officer, and was later commissioned as a Naval Aerospace Maintenance Officer. George holds a BS in Electrical Engineering Technology from Excelsior College in Albany, New York. George resides in Cumming, Georgia. The last panelist I'd like to introduce is Lee Marine. Lee is a talent acquisition development leader and consultant. He has been in this space for about 9 years after operating in several commercial and government roles. He previously ran the nationwide operations for Microsoft Military Affairs and was a program manager for the Microsoft Software and Systems Academy, as well as a senior training content designer and instructor trainer. Prior to Microsoft, Lee held a variety of positions in the Marine Corps to include senior program manager and instructional systems designer for amphibious warfare training. Lee has over 15 years of working with the military and veterans. So let's go ahead and kick it off with the first question. So what is the importance of establishing a veteran hiring program, and how does one attain buy-in from executive leadership to do so? George, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. And before diving in, thanks, Doug, for having me participate in the roundtable. Happy to be here and join in the discussion. Great question in terms of establishing a military-connected veteran hiring program with a particular company and organization, and especially addressing the internal buy-in piece. And I would suggest that when this is just based on personal experience of having observed this, when you get ready to actually launch a military hiring initiative with a program, you absolutely want to get that executive buy-in, but you need to get buy-in up and down, the chain of command, all individuals who could potentially, be in a leadership role as you bring veterans into the organization. Before you even, put the wheels in motion to start recruiting and attracting military connected talent, to the firm, I can't overstate the importance of getting that buy-in, and that buy-in needs to come not from, say, sometimes folks think it's more of a charitable, situation, or it's something that we need to do, that's good in the community, for the individuals. The real buy-in comes when folks within the leadership of the organization understand that they are going to benefit from tapping into, one of the best talent pools that they can, in terms of meeting the hiring needs at their organization. And as they realize that, from a frontline leader to, senior management, that as they bring this military talent on board, that they as an organization and their personal team is actually going to benefit from having that individual on board. When you get to that point of that buy-in, that's when the program goes smooth. That's when it's time to actually start recruiting and bringing those individuals in. And I've seen this from a personal standpoint of organizations that tried to put the cart before the horse, and it wasn't, a good situation. Those organizations that followed this process, it was a fantastic process for them. And I just want to take one more minute to emphasize that even the Department of Labor recently, they've had guidance around veteran hiring, but this past May they updated their guidance on hiring for employers to hire veterans. And coincidentally, when you take a look at their guidance, the very first topic that they address is building that business case for hiring veterans. In other words, getting that internal buy-in. And they've done a fantastic job of pulling business leaders in for that document. I'll put it in the chat function as well, as far as a link for folks if they want to take a look at it. But that is an outstanding guide. But to drive the point home, the very first thing that guide addresses is building the business case for hiring veterans, i.e. getting that buy-in.
Great, thanks, George. Lee, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, building off what George said, painting a clear picture in terms of, what is the outcome, and understanding, from executive leadership perspective, what do they want out of this program? And obviously, DE&I, or diversity, equality, or equity and inclusion is critical, but to build that business case of what's going to be the return on this investment of starting this program, what are you getting, and a clear picture of that timeline of how long it will take to establish this pipeline, to tap into some of those different pools of talent, and get the organization's name out there, to start seeing some veterans, military talent working their way through the organization's pipeline, and getting a very clear picture of, hey, here's what the return on our investment will be, and that those business objectives are clear and understood from the beginning. So it isn't, hey, this is, sort of mission purpose, or this is CSR, versus there, as George alluded to in that, that document from the Department of Labor, there is a very clear, potential return from establishing one of these programs from both a talent acquisition standpoint and a business case.
And I'll add a little bit to that. And just for context on my perspective, I work with Microsoft's program training vets. I work with companies to get them hired. So I kind of have the opposite perspective. I work with hundreds of different companies trying to get people in rather than trying to bring them into our company. And so the biggest thing I see is that companies go out and they start building these programs, and they go talk to people about it, but they don't get legitimate buy-in. They might get a thumbs up, but they don't really get people behind them, especially as George mentioned, from the top to the bottom. And so, that thumbs up doesn't go very far when it comes to getting these veterans who may not have 100% requirements match in the interview process and in the door. And I think we'll discuss this more throughout, so I won't dig in too deep to that, but just something to think about as we get started here.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off what everyone else has said, one of the issues that I found when we were starting up the military program at Zillow was, again, that lack of buy-in from middle management. So executive leadership saw, that this was a a great opportunity, obviously, to bring in some amazing talent, et cetera, and also to really assist the business in their equity and belonging standings. However, it was a very big challenge, and still is, working with kind of that middle management and getting that understanding of why our military personnel would make a great fit. They're very used to just a standard list of requirements they would like for someone in a particular position. However, it's very hard to understand someone who has a non-traditional background. And so there's a lot that goes into that. So again, while you may have that buy-in from upper leadership, it's that the real work really goes in on that middle management level.
Great, thanks, Roshan. Let's move on to our next question. So if everyone can share with the audience where to start when designing a strategy for your veteran hiring program. Dan, can you kick it off with this question with a few points on how to create a veteran affinity or employee resource group?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to, and that's why I said we'll get more into it. You know, it goes back to the buy-in and just the general having the conversations and finding the right people. I think that's a theme you'll hear too during this call is, you know, you might get the VP's buy-in and he's telling people that they need to go and do this thing. But if you don't find the right advocates that are really going to follow up and push, you know, the line managers to go out and have these conversations, it's not going to go very far. And we've discussed this a little bit before. All of us on the panel have had previous conversations. Sometimes a non-vet within the organization is the biggest advocate. It really just comes down to finding that right person. And sometimes it's better for them not to be a veteran because, you know, the perspective is not, well, this vet's trying to get other vets hired. You know, building an affinity group as well, things to consider about getting the vets in and helping them land properly and get ramped up is, you know, creating a group of mentors that are vets or not, but, you know, able to get them established within the organization. It is nice if they're vets for the mentors because they know where the local VA is. They know, you know, how to get the people kind of established and plugged in locally as they start with the company, especially if they're separating from the military, relocating and getting started. I think, you know, that's kind of where I would start with this. And if anybody else wants to pick it up from there.
Yeah, as someone who had the opportunity to be a part of a brand new affinity network, one of the things that I find to be very, very important is for a company to really decide what do they want from their affinity networks across the board. Do they want them just to exist in order to provide almost like the next level club for their company? Or are they actually looking for a group of people who are the experts in their area surrounding the particular demographic that they're serving? And so what I found is that a bit of the battle that was hard fought was this idea that they were looking for people to basically join the affinity network. That's what they viewed as success. Success wasn't so much viewed as what initiatives are we pushing forward to actually change within our company. And so that's something that's super important up front for industry leaders, is to think about, okay, what are we looking for? Are we looking to utilize these people as the experts that they are within their area? Or are we looking to just basically create a place that they can kind of go and hang out? And so once that's decided, I feel like that can really make a big difference on how quickly your programs will be developed, how quickly your veteran employees and potential employees will actually, you know, how they'll actually feel when they're actually joining, and if they actually see a movement within the company when it comes to veterans programs, et cetera. So yeah, it's super vital to think about that ahead of time.
Yeah, along those lines too, I'd like to, you know, add a couple of comments. When you look at the individuals themselves, the veterans, most of the time when you ask people after they separated from the military, you know, what do they miss the most? And it's typically the other people, right? That camaraderie and so forth. So if you can establish an affinity group, a business resource group, a network focused around veterans of the organization, it's going to kind of, you know, help you as a company build that sense of community, you know, as well. So it's going to kind of feed that need. But along, you know, some of the other folks' points too, it pulls other individuals in to volunteer and be a part of this, to take on mentorship roles, figure out what the focus of the group's going to be. It can contribute to your employee referral program and the recruiting process of like-minded folks to come on board. We've even had, for example, at Booz Allen, our resource group get together and make enhancements to some of the policies that we have at the company to make it an even better place for veterans to grow a post-military career. One of the accomplishments they recently were able to do as a team on a volunteer basis, as far as being a part of this group, was to improve the military leave for our Guard and Reserve folks that are still active, in the Guard and Reserve, to make it easier, and also to put assurances in place that the men and women that are still actively serving our country in the Guard and Reserve, they would not have to use any of their own personal time, their PTO, in order to serve. It was kind of neat to see just some fine tuning, around the edges to make a program like that better. So when you can pull in some leadership and to, a point that was made earlier about even pulling in some folks that aren't necessarily veterans that can be a part of this program and be good champions, for it. It could just be a great way to, build that sense of community and actually have an impact on your retention, and really get things moving in the right direction as far as not just employing military connected talent, but making them a part of your family, making them a part of an integral part of the team.
Yeah, and with that, once the resource group is established, sort of that mentoring or influencing the community before they even come in, or improving your talent pipeline, can happen in ways like, producing good documentation that's like, hey, here's a hiring guide for veterans at our organization, and putting that out, making it easily available so that when there are interested folks, they know, hey, here's what I should expect with the hiring process. Here's where they're looking for people. You can put that out, and that answers some of those questions. Also, identifying someone, a couple people to be a potential point of contact. Sometimes, transitioning service members, veterans, they're looking for someone to talk to, like, hey, can you tell me about this experience? And, having a good sort of landing pad for someone, or a point of contact to talk to, versus just the first person they find that that has military, that has a service branch in their background on LinkedIn or something like that, but saying, hey, this is sort of the person, these are the people that you can talk to that can help be that link if maybe you don't have any veterans already on your talent acquisition or recruiting team.
Yeah, Lee, along those lines, when I was leading our military hiring initiative, and we'd go to a base that where we may also have an office close by, I would pull in folks from our armed services network. So you got a recruiter that's obviously getting paid to say good things about the company and pull folks in. But then you have other members of the team. They're not on the recruiting side. They're veterans, maybe they're new hires, et cetera, but they're just sharing their experience on that. It can be really instrumental in attracting folks to the organization. And it's a good use of, again, that affinity network.
Great, thanks everyone. This is a good segue to transition to external facing processes on how to actively recruit veterans, wounded warriors, and military spouses. Roshan, do you mind kicking off this question for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a billion different ways to kind of go about this and start. But one of the ways that we started off in my current company, again, Zillow, was by meeting with the recruiting decision makers and working with them to set up an actual kind of playbook on how do we go about actually bringing on military hires. Because again, there needs to be a bit of an understanding on how it's different, and how do we open up the doorway to actually bring them in, and what's the best way. Are we looking at top of funnel? Are we looking at referrals? What are we looking at? How are we looking at best bringing in these particular candidates? So what's super important, again, is to set up an actual foundation to understand how are we going to bring them in. The first thing we did at Zillow was to start off with, one, finding legislation to show that here in Washington in particular, I know there's a few states, but we can actually hire, we can set a hiring, veteran hiring, I don't want to say quota, but goal, similar to federal organizations and so on. So again, really to sit down and set out an actual plan, working with decision makers to decide how do we want to, what is our end goal? Like, what do we want to do? How do we want to bring people in? But starting off with just the baseline of what can we do? And then starting with the actual kind of playbook, and then moving from there, and then moving into training for the recruiting org, and then moving from there into training for your actual hiring managers, et cetera. And this is where after that, you can bring in your affinity networks, your mentors, et cetera, to kind of open up those opportunities.
Yeah, and with that, companies will typically try and, a lot of times roll this into their other D&I or D&I initiatives. But, there's something of a conflict there sometimes where, the military population, the veteran community can largely be white and male. And so having it aligned as, important to the diversification of the larger organization and being representative of the population that it serves, whether it's local to the state, the nation, internationally. Right now I think the veterans in the United States is like 5.6%, or like 18 million individuals. So you're not necessarily getting a perfect cross section, but that also there is going to be overlays. Different branches of the military have different sort of diversity pools and stuff like that. Similar with, you're going to have veterans with disabilities, and so making sure that that's understood from the beginning of not just, hey, we need to increase this or that, but having those targets, like Roshan said, that align with federal standards, for example, can be a good place to start.
Another piece I'd like to add is, once you've done those things that both Roshan and Lee have talked about, and you want to get some momentum on it, Doug, to your point, even get out there externally and start the recruitment process. One of the best things that you can do is use those success stories that you already have in there. I'm sure you can find across the spectrum at different levels, veterans within the organization that you can highlight with their permission, what their transition was like, what how have they grown, with your organization, but share those success stories. When I was, before I came to Booz Allen, I helped develop a military hiring initiative for a global manufacturing company. And before we, started the recruitment process, even though we didn't have a military recruiting effort, and there's some, organizations that are like this, you still probably have some veterans in the organization. It was easy for me to go in and find, some individuals to put a spotlight on and kind of show that success story that they've had without a focus. So now imagine the success that we can have once we actually do put a focus on it as well. So those personalized success stories can be huge leverage on getting the buy-in internally, but also when you get ready to go external and start, recruiting as well.
Yeah, and I'd add to the success story portion, with our program grads, having somebody get in the door and do well is sometimes goes the farthest. I think another thing that really needs to be considered is having conversations with your team, with your hiring managers, and finding what are the real hard requirements for the jobs that you're looking to hire these vets for. Something that really opens the door is when you change that job description, the requirements section, to just what's absolutely hard requirements. A lot of vets will talk themselves out of applying to your company because there's one requirement that they're just not sure if they meet in there. Another thing is even just having a point of contact rather than just go and apply online, and establish a team of people that will talk to them. If there's someone they can reach out to, they're much more likely to reach out and to talk to somebody and ask questions, versus that one requirement they're not sure about. Many of them just won't apply at that point. So that's something to consider. And then when you consider even the broader discussion, and I think, Doug, you mentioned military spouses on there, it's also important to consider location, relocation, remote work. What absolutely does need to be done physically on site. Military spouses are a good example of a huge workforce of people that have pretty extensive work experience, but they're in one location. Their spouse is in the military, they're stationed somewhere. They might be a perfect fit for your organization, but they can't come in and work there, or they might move within a year or 2 years. And so as long as your team is aware of that and maybe creating opportunities for them to work remotely, you'll greatly increase the opportunity for military spouses, veterans, transitioning service members to come in and be able to apply to the organization. So yeah, I think the job descriptions is a big one, and really just getting that, again, back to the buy-in, getting the buy-in and understanding which ones of these do they have to have a master's degree for this role, or is that just a nice to have, and just kind of opening that door and allowing the conversations to happen. And then on top of that, there are a lot of organizations out there doing training, ours being one of them, training people up for certain types of jobs, working with companies directly to get them hired at no cost to the company. So, you should look into that as well, because that's ever growing. There are so many different organizations out there training for different fields and just trying to get veterans hired.
Great, thanks, Dan. And the next question that we were going to ask is, the importance of drafting a veteran-friendly job description. Anyone from the group would like to chime in on this?
Yeah, I'll tackle it first. Great question, Doug. It's funny when you talk to some folks when they get ready to write their job description. Some organizations have templates that they go by and so forth. But I've talked to job managers that wrote a job description, and you get in an intake call and you start to talk about it. Hey, what was the resources? How'd you come up with this? Well, it was basically the profile of the individual that just vacated the opportunity. So they used that individual's background and profile to write the new job description, including the qualifications to Dan's point earlier. The degree requirements, or maybe a specific number of years, for example, in manufacturing. But if you want to attract, military talent to an organization like that, let's say that we'll focus on the manufacturing environment. You're not going to find very many men and women transitioning out of the military with manufacturing experience. And it's funny, I was part of an organization where they said they finally came to the realization that they can teach the manufacturing piece. They can't teach some of the transferable skills that the military brings, the leadership piece, that learning agility that they fine-tune, while serving in the military. So they started to work on the job description so that transitioning military professionals especially could be competitive, for these roles, and started pulling out, the hard requirements for manufacturing, but yet focusing on some of the other attributes that folks would need. And that's one of the good things that you can do. In my current organization, we have some hiring managers that are realizing that, the degree sometimes isn't necessarily having a degree for a particular role, especially if there's not a specific major that's required. They're just putting a degree in because that's what they've always done. Where they realize that based on some of the talent coming out of the military in the enlisted ranks, they can waive that degree requirement based on the experience and the additional qualifications that somebody brings, to an organization. So you can start, focusing on things like that when it comes to writing those job descriptions.
Yeah, and George touched on it, the learning agility piece, which I can't stress enough. Veterans, coming through in their time in the military, whether it's their initial training, following schools they went to, are one of the most, for lack of a better term, programmable talent pools you can imagine working with. And so, and on top of that, with the experiences, is, a young, sergeant coming from the Army or Marine Corps who's been a platoon sergeant managing 50 individuals, does that perfectly transfer over to managing, work group or team of 50 individuals? Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's obviously going to be a little different due to cultural things. But you have, these individuals that have, one enlistment is 4 years of work experience, that it can have some eye-popping, difficulties and constraints. And so bringing those skills and abilities over, can pay huge dividends. And there's always going to be sort of that conflict between, hey, do we hire, a 22-year-old college grad that we're looking for that has this certain background, versus that same, 22-year-old coming right out of the military, there are going to be differences in terms of, their academic background and some of that knowledge. But the trade-off is the skills, abilities, and experiences that you get can be eye-popping. And some of the best results we've seen, ironically, can come from combat arms, where you have, the infantry and armor and some of these other professions that had to have an astoundingly diverse skill set, and they had to be mentally flexible and have that learning agility. And you can put them in these places. George mentioned manufacturing, but Dan and I have seen it definitely in IT, where you can put them in and they just go. They know they need to learn what the job is. They know there's a mission accomplished. They know who their team is, and it's astounding to see what they can do very quickly.
And to, again, piggyback on that even more, one of the best things that I saw when it came to military programming and hiring was when I was at Microsoft, actually. And in the war room, or after the interviews, basically what they were looking at was, does this person fit our core values? I'm not sure if that's still how they work, but that was one of the best things I saw. They're like, okay, we see that this person was successful in the program. We see that this person is able to learn and able to move quickly. And now, do they fit within the core values? Is this someone that we can work with to grow and within the core values? And that was huge. And that changed how people were hired, because it no longer went off of this checklist of, do they meet these exact requirements that, as we know, within hiring, most people don't meet the exact requirements that are on any particular job description. But really, do we see this person as someone who's going to be a benefit to the company? And are they trainable? And how can we move forward with them? And I believe if every company viewed the veteran community from that lens, that it would really open up so many more opportunities and really help organizations grow their veteran programs. To look at them, how do they, are they going to be a good, I don't like to use the word fit, but do they fit within our core values? Are they someone who is teachable? Are they someone who we can basically teach a skill? And so in the military, again, if you've been in, you know that you have basically, you might have one job that you're doing, but you're probably doing 50 zillion other jobs throughout your career. I know that I never actually did the job I was trained for. So, which isn't too outrageous. That's a lot of us. So it's just keeping an open mind, and how will they fit within the company, and can we train them this particular skill?
And one more piece with that, is the loyalty a lot of times you're getting from military folks and veterans. They're used to being loyal to a flag, to the Constitution, esprit de corps and honor, courage, commitment, and some of these other things. They like to be part of the team. They like to be part of the organization, and to build it up, and that pride in the organization. And I accidentally hit an answer or a question that was live, but that feeds into retention. When you take care of them, they're going to go above and beyond, because they have that pride in the organization. They're loyal to the organization. They want to make things better. That's what military folks are used to, is if you're going to stick around, make things better until you can change things. And so that helps with that retention. Sometimes there's sort of the misconception that's like, or sometimes there's stats that are thrown around of, veterans are only in their first job for a certain amount of time, which, I've seen, I know Dan's seen, maybe George and Roshan have seen, where, folks will wind up in some of these jobs and with certain employers for years and years and years, where, their first job may be where they're happiest, because it reflects a similar community that they experienced during their time in the military.
Great, thanks everyone. Moving on to our next question, George, can you describe what kind of functions or roles are best suited for certain kinds of MOSs?
Well, it's actually a pretty tough question, because there are there are lots of opportunities out there, as we've kind of touched on here, where individuals can end up being qualified for a role, and it may not have anything to do, with their MOS and so forth. It's sometimes they're hired based on their potential because of all the other attributes that they bring, to an organization. But then there are those roles, that maybe the requirements are a bit more, stringent. So, for example, we have a lot of opportunity in the cyber realm, and those individuals that already have cyber expertise are going to be the ones that are most competitive, for those positions. Because of the demand for individuals in opportunities like that, we actually do have a training program where we can upskill individuals to be competitive. But the ideal scenario when we want somebody in that opportunity yesterday is to go out then and find, those individuals that have, say, that cybersecurity expertise in the military. There are mixed emotions out there in terms of using like a skills translator, and there are some good ones out there. I only encourage individuals that are looking to bring on military talent to use that skills translator, so that MOS as to, what roles that they can be competitive for when they have a very specific need to fill. Maybe it's an electronics type role and they need electronics technicians that they, must have. Then focus on an MOS, focus on a skills translator, to do that. But don't do that for every role that you have open. I'll just give you one quick example. When I was leading a military hiring initiative, again, for a manufacturing firm, as we got leaders within the organization to buy into, hire an individual based on their potential, teach them the manufacturing piece. We had one location that hired an individual who had a partial career like me, enlisted, and then partial as a commissioned officer, but all in the Army as military police. So if you used an MOS, type translator, you'd be thinking physical security or something like that for this individual. But that's not what he was hired for. He was hired, again, based on his potential, because during the interview process, kind of like what you described, Roshan, this team had an event where they brought in military talent. It was almost like a food fight broke out, which was a good thing to see, because people were competing internally to get some of these folks on board. That's how well some of the interviews went. Well, this individual was hired for a frontline leader in a manufacturing environment with no manufacturing experience. It was based on that learning agility, the leadership skills, how he presented himself, and so forth. And in a short period of time, he had moved from that frontline leader role to a quality position, and later in a high-vis project manager type role within about an 18-month period. This from a military police, going into a fairly high-tech, type environment. So again, to just summarize, I always encourage folks, use an MOS skills translator when you have a hard specific need and you need that specific talent, to fill the role. Otherwise, take the blinders off and let's look at an individual based on their potential, their fit within our core values, and make an investment to get them up to speed where that's needed.
And adding to that, and back kind of to, again, what Roshan was saying, a lot of times the key thing you want to do is look for the characteristics and the traits that you really want in that job, and then you can go back to seeing, did they manage 50 people? You can kind of tie some of those things in from the military work experience. But a lot of times the core characteristics are, as long as you've identified those, a lot of these vets can come in and do whatever the job is. We have people that are coming out from being a truck driver or infantry in the military, going through our 17-week training program and getting hired as full-scale software engineer at Microsoft, or other competitors of Microsoft, or George's company is another one of them. It really comes down to those hard requirements. Which ones are you pulling out, which are absolute musts? And then, how can you then open up to conversations? And, the food fight between the hiring managers is a good example of it. That's how the events go at Microsoft. That's how the events go at all these big companies that come and interview a whole bunch of veterans at one time for a limited number of openings. Then you get vets in the door, and then all of a sudden the other teams come and say, well, where did you get this person from? Now everybody wants to hire a vet. And that's what we see happen most commonly, is just, you have to get that door open, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, getting that backing to just get some people in the door initially and really, get the door open.
Yeah, and I can't stress it enough with MOSs, occupational field codes, and stuff like that. They very often do not paint the whole picture, particularly as service members get further and further into the career. You know, Rashawn made the great point, you know, hey, this was my job, but often I wasn't even doing what, you know, my official role in the military, you know, was supposed to be as far as the table of organization. And so, you know, looking at some of these things and unpacking them beyond just, oh, hey, we're looking for someone that does something with computers, you know, hey, this person had sort of computers or electronics in their background. The other thing is sometimes there aren't perfect matches as far as, you know, yes, this person was an X in the military. We're looking for someone who is an X, but what they were working on may have been different, less advanced, more advanced, whatever, than, you know, the actual item objects that they may be working with, the technology they may be working with, you know, at a certain organization. But making sure, you know, with those MOSs, with those job descriptions, making sure that the applicant tracking system isn't unintentionally closing the door on, you know, on vets getting their foot in the door and getting in front of the person. The one thing that, you know, a lot of this research and what, you know, I think all of us is probably see empirically is when you can get, you know, a veteran transitioning service member face to face with a recruiter, anyone in the organization, you know, they always sort of fall in love. You know, they're always like, oh, this person's awesome, this person's great. You know, and not to paint the, you know, applicant tracking systems as a boogeyman, but, you know, they're looking for very empirical things versus, hey, I can see just from talking to this person, you know, just from hearing their background, just from hearing their story, this is someone we want to bring into this organization. And there might be a variety of roles that we can plug them into right now, regardless of what their background may look like on paper in black and white.
Great, thanks everyone. The next quick question we'll cover, I think we've covered it at a high level, but George, I'd like you to start. What are some best practices or ways to educate non-veteran employees in creating a welcoming workplace for veterans?
I think one of the best ways is to circle back on one of the things I brought up before and do it with those success stories, you know, that you have. Even if you don't have a veteran hiring focus at your company, I guarantee you, a company of any size is going to have veterans working there. Find them, check in with them, make sure that obviously they're happy with where they're at, what they're doing, what their growth has been like, and then use that to share the success story. And kind of to Dan's point, oftentimes when you start hiring vets, you know, most organizations I've been in, those hiring managers are competitive. You know, it's like when somebody finds a great solution to some of their problems, then the others want in on that solution. And that's where military connected talent can help a lot of companies. They are an outstanding solution to solving your problems when it comes to finding, you know, that quality hire, you know, for your organization. Use those success stories, leverage them first, and then keep doing it. You know, as the new hires come in, they start making a great impact. Rinse and repeat.
Yeah, and I think, you know, regardless of the size of the organization, as George sort of mentioned, there's going to be someone, you know, a few folks that are likely veterans or have military backgrounds, whether that's known to the organization or not. There's some folks that are, you know, sort of undercover that you may not realize, oh, you were in, you know, this conflict or this service branch or whatever it is. Tapping into them, but not necessarily jumping to the conclusion that, hey, we have this one person, they're a veteran, they were in this branch, so they know everything about all veterans. Or, hey, you know, you have this one person, they did this, so, you know, hey, we're interested in hiring this other person, they have an Air Force background, you were in the Air Force, tell us all about them. And, you know, the military, you know, the DOD, the different branches can be pretty wide. Now, it's great, we you know, when you can tap into different veterans in your organization to sort of help paint a picture and give you ideas, and that helps sort of bridge that gap regardless of who's coming in. The flip side is being hyper specific. And, you know, like I kind of mentioned, is, hey, you know, we're interested in bringing you on. You're a Marine, you're an infantry person. We have another Marine who's working here. We're going to pair you up at the hip, and, you guys are going to be best friends and help each other out perfectly. And so it's finding sort of that sweet spot of tapping into, you know, the talent that you already have, looking to expand that, you know, but not necessarily jumping to conclusions and saying, hey, you know, experiences are going to be a 1-for-1 swap, you know, between these people.
If, and yeah, if I can jump in here for a second too. So I'm a believer in two different methods. One, again, coming from the Microsoft program, one of the things I was able to do, and I'm not sure if they still do it, but was to help establish a mentorship program, which allowed people to come in and actually military, with a military background or not, to come in and really get to know these particular individuals and to see them outside of just the stereotypes that may exist as someone who's coming from the military into a new role. The other thing that I'm a particular fan of is training from the very beginning of where it's integrated in actual leadership training, where it's integrated in actual employee training. A lot of the issues that we run into are particular stereotypes surrounding the veteran individual. And that has been a huge issue in a lot of our hiring initiatives, where it's trying to break down those stereotypes, et cetera. So one of the things that I feel is very important is to start early on and integrating this training around the military individual and how do you engage with them? How is it different? There's a different language in a lot of cases, especially for those that are coming directly out of the military. There's a different way of communication. We tend to be a little bit more direct in our communication, which may be great in some companies. I particularly work in a company where it's a little softer, where it's a different demographic. So it's learning how to engage. So it really is, as Lee was saying, getting to know the individual, one, but also incorporating on a larger level some actual training, getting to know them, but also breaking down those stereotypes very, very early on in order to then be able to actually open up those conversations further down the road.
Yeah, and one more thing that I've seen, just to add real quick, Doug, something like a happy hour and just meeting people and meeting some vets out in town, promoting it on social media. I've seen a lot of teams within Microsoft and within a lot of our partner organizations bring along team members who aren't vets, who aren't familiar with vets. It's a very good way to, you have a bunch of vets there. They're all pretty comfortable around each other. You have your team there. Everybody's, meeting up at a neutral place and just talking. It really lets people get to see that the vets are just people too, for one, and then everybody can just start having open conversations. And a lot of times those events lead to a bunch of interviews being set up because, everybody kind of hit it off, and you see who you're interested in and who you're not. You see who had a elevator pitch ready and showed up ready to talk and who didn't, so it is a really good way to start conversations, something to think about. And I saw that there was a question, how can organizations ensure they're getting visibility to vets immediately as they transition out of the service? And in the chat there, social media and events like that are one way to do it. And I've seen that turn out pretty well, and a lot of candidates show up to events like that. That's the first thought I had on that.
Great.
Yeah, and there's a lot of these groups. Dan said social media. Something that I've actually seen, which has been pretty fantastic. The DoD, the Department of Labor, Veterans Affairs. When veterans are transitioning out of the military, they're getting a lot better at using LinkedIn. Sometimes it can be kind of a surprise at how enthusiastic vets can be to some industry folks. But having some of those events. There's also some other places. Veterans groups online, but also, where there are those job fairs. If you're looking for people that are already local in person, once more job fairs are starting up and picking up, going out to those, not being like, oh, well, we don't have a dedicated military team. You don't have to. Some of the best advocates and the best folks that you can send are people that do the jobs and know what they're looking for, and can talk to these people and say, hey, here's what I need, and have the ability to say, can you do the job? Not just, hey, I was in the military, you were in the military, let's talk about military stuff. oh yeah, I needed to hire for a job. So having a mix of folks in person and then online, just using things on LinkedIn, hashtags or whatever it is, or looking for those, some of those veteran specific groups, even on like Facebook. There's a group that I think the Facebook team ran called Vetworking, where you can access that, get on and say, hey, I have this job, I'm looking for someone. It'd be great if we can hire a vet. And it's that simple.
Great, thanks, Lee. Anyone else like to chime in, or should we move on to the next question? All right, we can move on. So the next question we'll cover in our Q&A portion. What are some quick tips for recruiters when reviewing resumes of transitioning service members to ensure an inclusive and equitable hiring process?
I can chime in on that. I mean, I'm very big on, again, training. I'm very big on not just kind of touching. I know that there are quick tips. However, from my point of view, there's organizations out there that actually have training programs and training seminars and so on, and how to actually read a military resume, you could say, or how to understand more of the military lingo, et cetera. I mean, you can just Google also how to, what does someone mean by a certain MOS? Again, I was Navy, so I still don't even understand MOSs. I've worked in this industry for a very long time, so I still have to Google it. But I feel that it's important to really do it right and to actually get that training for your recruiters and to really, encourage them to go on and really learn who are they talking to. And also to really look at it from a point of view and a lens that I know traditionally as companies, we want the actual candidate to come to us with that understanding of how, with everything already translated and so on. That's ideal. However, when you're getting that transitioning service member, in some cases, they may have had some of the training to translate that resume, but in a lot of cases they won't. So I feel that if you really want that veteran talent, and you could be overlooking people just because it could be a difficulty understanding that resume. So therefore, just really taking it, going online, getting that additional training and so on, and maybe taking that extra step to just kind of seeing what they're actually saying. I would also encourage to really, have a conversation with them. In some cases, the resume, and I believe this in any case, like the resume is it's a piece of paper, right? It gives you so much information. If you have a small enough organization, or if you can, to have more of those individual conversations, that's really when you're going to get more insight on what they're doing. But yeah, definitely take that time, do a little bit more training. And we're talking about, you can take a good hour and get so much information.
Yeah, on those lines, to piggyback on Rashawn's comment on the training for your recruiters, let's say you're in a small organization, you don't necessarily have a military recruiting team where they spend, all day on this. So you're relying on your other talent acquisition folks for this. SHRM has a great self-paced, free course that individuals can go through that will get them up to speed and allow them to get a better understanding for when they are reviewing a resume, as well as the veteran community as a whole, to include military spouses. It's a Veterans at Work certification process that folks can go through. So especially a small organization, if you don't have a dedicated military recruiting team, you can have your recruiters do that. And the other point I'd like to make before passing the baton on is get your recruiters to slow down when reading a resume. Have them focus on those quantifiable bullets that hopefully the transitioning military professionals or veterans are putting in. They can start to see a correlation between those measurable bullets and accomplishments that an individual has, and start to see how that can tie into one of their roles. But they have to slow down, do more than a 10-second scan of a resume before moving on to the next one.
Yeah, and looking at those resumes, kind of being able to read between the lines. You don't need to be an expert on, a lot of the different military functions and facets, but when you can see very clearly with some folks' resumes, whether it's someone who was in, for 2, 3, or 4 years or 20 years, you can see the investment that the DoD can put back into some of these people and how diverse their talents and skills are going to be, whether it has been fully translated. But when you see someone, that, hey, this is what they originally were, but they also got training in this and they also got training in this, that was a conscious decision to invest heavily in that individual because they have an expansive talent or skill set. And with that, something else that sometimes comes through, sometimes doesn't. Sometimes you'll see great numbers representing their accomplishments in terms of, hours, resources, money budgets that they were in charge of. Sometimes you won't. But recognizing, when you have, a 22-year-old, 21-year-old who is, the crew chief on a vehicle, or, they were, or a series of vehicles, that's millions and millions of dollars of ordnance that, they weren't just sort of responsible for, something bad happens, they could get fired. They were responsible for that with lives on the line in, difficult situations. Oh, and by the way, if they mess something up, they could literally go to jail. And so the amount of trust and confidence that's put in some of these people, again, sometimes it can be reflected in, the financial volume of things they were responsible for, but, being able to slow down, like George said, read between the lines on some of those accomplishments, and how they show up in resumes and interviews.
Just one last point on that is back to what Roshan said last. Have a conversation with them. Call them, talk to them, go through the resume for 15 minutes. Set something up, because I've seen so many people come through our program that did 20 years in cyber. They have a stack of certifications, a high level clearance, but they went from high school to military. They didn't have a resume. They've never applied to jobs or looked at job descriptions. They're the most technical person I've ever met, but their resume doesn't show that, and they would have a hard time going and applying to companies and having these conversations because of that resume, when, as soon as they start talking to people, companies are fighting over them. So have the conversation is the biggest kind of point I would make out of all of that.
And I wanted to touch on this. There's the question, Doug, you put up, are there any functional positions, industry in general, where you think veteran talent is underrepresented? And then there was, from an attendee, what are major types of positions veterans are looking for? And the answer is everything, everywhere. I think one of the funniest examples I commonly saw, a lot of the counterintelligence folks that I worked with who were interrogators, they had some of the squirreliest jobs you can imagine in the military. A lot of them get out and go into the seminary. They get into religious services, and it's a total 180 from one to the other. So while there are some individuals that want to continue what they were doing, they love the work of what they were doing in the military, and they want to continue that in the private sector. There are many others that they've been there, they got the t-shirt, they're ready to make that change, and they want to pivot into a new sector and bring their skills and abilities to that. So in terms of what types of positions are veterans looking for, they want to find a great role, find a great fit, and have an opportunity to explore interests that they might not have been able to during their time in the military. Some folks, they get the job they wanted in the military, they do it, they love it, that's the end of the story. Others, they do what the military told them to, especially if they enlisted during a time of war. They did that job, they did it to the best of their abilities, loved their time there, but they've always had a fascination with X, and that's what they want to pivot into. And having that ability, having that pipeline, perfect example, Dan, myself, Roshan probably saw this too. We'd have veterans that say, hey, I want to get into the video game industry. There isn't, while there are some, simulations and stuff like that in the military, there isn't a, graphics designer, 3D modeling role, maybe somewhere, but not really organic to the military. And so that's an example of how vets want to pivot. And if you can give that opportunity, they're always going to impress you.
And if, so the underrepresented part, tech, and some more tech. And I'm not even just saying like actual technical roles. I mean, everything from operations to facilities to developers, you name it. It is very, very difficult unless the company has actually established an actual military hiring program to hire to get veterans hired in tech companies for whatever reason. And I'm hoping that changes, and I do see some movement. However, the companies tend to be fairly young. The companies tend to be fairly disconnected from the military because more than likely, many of them did not serve, or they didn't really even have now people that actually did serve. It's a very different world. And so, and yet they bring so much to the table, and there's such a, and I mean, that's what we're talking about, right? What can military bring to the table? Why should we hire them? How do we do it? Again, it's starting with just taking one moment to understand the actual individual and what can they bring to the company, and getting some clear understanding on why there's such a benefit to our particular companies. But yeah, tech and some more tech.
Great. Thanks, Arshan. And thank you everyone for joining this afternoon, and a special thanks to our panelists. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our panelists directly via LinkedIn to connect, and feel free to check out Halo's previous events on our YouTube channel, and we will keep everyone updated about our future events. Halo is hosting a virtual roundtable event on Friday, August 13th, centered around best practices for establishing and scaling employee resource groups, and we hope you can join. We will be sending out a survey early next week to get your feedback as we continue to iterate for future events. And again, thanks everyone for joining, and have a great weekend.